The cabin was quiet, but the tension crackled like static. "I'm going to ask you one last time," the lead flight attendant said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her voice sliced through the ambient hum like a blade. "Move to the back of the plane or I'll call security." She stood with her arms folded, posture stiff, tone dipped in contempt, performing for the cabin like she was delivering justice. But what exactly was the crime? Sitting too close to privilege, or simply being black in a tailored Navy suit? Naomi Williams looked up slowly, unbothered. Her voice didn't rise. Her posture didn't shift. "I've already told you, I'm not moving." The way she said it, calm, clear, immovable, didn't just catch the flight attendant off guard. It shook the air. Because Naomi didn't flinch, didn't get loud, didn't beg, and that silence, that stillness, that was power disguised as patience. Around her, passengers exchanged glances. Some whispered, some scowled, some just sipped their champagne, pretending not to see. Outside, the sun kissed the side of the jet, reflecting its sleek white shell like a mirror to the world. Inside, leather seats and gold trims screamed exclusivity. Everyone walked in expecting first-class service, but not everyone was treated first class. Naomi had entered the cabin quietly. No flashy jewelry, no entourage, just her presence, measured, confident, unshakable. But to Lauren Reed, the lead flight attendant who ran her cabin like a kingdom, Naomi looked out of place. Lauren's uniform was immaculate. Her hair, not a strand out of place. She smiled at the Raymonds, offered them coffee before takeoff, complimented Mrs. Raymond's knitting bag like it was a designer purse. But when Naomi passed, the warmth disappeared. Her greeting was a curt, "Welcome aboard." No eye contact, no grace, just ice. Naomi noticed. She always noticed. But she said nothing. Not yet. From the moment she stepped on, Naomi felt the judgment crawling over her skin. It wasn't overt, it never is. That's the thing about prejudice. It whispers before it shouts. It shows up in what people don't say, in who gets offered a drink first, in who's asked to move when they're already where they belong. And as Naomi sat, seatbelt clicked, bag neatly tucked beneath her feet, she didn't know yet how far Lauren would push. But she knew this. Someone was going to learn today. Passengers watched, waiting for the next move. Some were annoyed, others entertained. One woman, a nosy socialite with too much perfume and too little empathy, leaned to her friend, whispering, "She's probably sneaking into first class." But Naomi stayed still, not because she was weak, but because she was calculating, watching, waiting. Because sometimes the most powerful person in the room doesn't need to speak first. Sometimes power doesn't wear pearls or Prada. It sits quiet, taking notes. And when it speaks, it changes everything. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't about a seat. This was the beginning of a reckoning. 135,000 feet above the ground. And no one on that plane was ready for what came next. It started with a tone, just a tone, the kind that says you're not supposed to be here, without ever needing to use those words. Naomi Williams stepped onto the jet's carpeted aisle with quiet precision. There was nothing loud or flashy about her, just a woman in her late 30s, sharp navy blazer, pressed slacks, and the kind of poise that didn't ask for attention but naturally drew it anyway. Her movements were measured, deliberate, composed, like someone who'd walked into rooms where people whispered her name before she arrived. Still, on this flight, no one whispered her name. Not yet. At the cabin door stood Lauren Reed, mid-40s, blonde bob, tailored uniform, sharp enough to cut. She was the kind of flight attendant who didn't need to speak to show you who was in charge. Her posture screamed control. Her smile? Selectively deployed. And when Naomi stepped forward, Lauren gave her that smile, but only half of it. "Welcome aboard," she said, tone clipped, eyes scanning Naomi with the speed of someone who thought she already had her figured out. Naomi met her gaze, gave the faintest nod. No pleasantries, no need. She'd felt that tone before, in boardrooms, boutiques, hotel lobbies. Lauren's welcome was the velvet rope disguised as professionalism. Naomi had no intention of grabbing it. Behind her, the scene shifted. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond." Lauren's voice lifted a full octave. Her eyes lit up. Her teeth flashed in full PR smile. The Raymonds, an elderly white couple in their 60s, glided up the steps like royalty returning to a familiar throne. Mrs. Raymond clutched a soft blue knitting bag. Mr. Raymond had a folded newspaper tucked under one arm. They looked like the kind of couple that hadn't flown commercial in a decade. Lauren treated them like royalty, offered to store their bags, offered tea before takeoff, and Naomi, just 2 steps ahead of them, caught every word. She didn't react. Naomi had spent her life being underestimated in rooms with chandeliers and shareholders. This was light work, but still she noted it. Every detail, every voice inflection, every behavioral shift. Not because she needed to remember it, but because it confirmed what she already knew. Lauren's hierarchy of worth wasn't printed on a manifest. It was in her tone. Naomi moved down the aisle, scanning her seat row third from the front. Premium leather, crisp magazine tucked beside the armrest, water already waiting on the side tray. She sat gracefully, placing her carry-on beneath the seat with quiet ease. She didn't fumble with bags, didn't look around for attention. Instead, she placed her phone into airplane mode and rested her palms on her lap. Stillness became her armor. Lauren moved past a few minutes later, adjusting, pillows helping another passenger with a coat. When she passed Naomi, she didn't make eye contact, didn't ask if she needed anything. Her entire body language shifted again, subtle but sharp. A slight tightening of her jaw, a sideways glance at Naomi's bag under the seat. The pursed lips that said, "You don't belong here," but wrapped in enough professionalism to avoid an HR complaint. Naomi watched it all, like glass catching sunlight, reflecting, not reacting. At the back of the plane, Grace, the junior flight attendant, stood watching quietly. She was younger, maybe mid-20s, eager but cautious. Her eyes drifted between Naomi and Lauren. Grace noticed the contrast. She noticed the energy shift. She noticed Lauren's favoritism. And even though she didn't speak, the discomfort was etched into her expression. Back up front, Mr. Raymond opened his paper with a soft rustle while Mrs. Raymond's knitting needles began their quiet rhythm. Across the aisle, a woman with oversized sunglasses tapped through her phone. Designer purse at her feet, perfume clinging to her every gesture. She glanced at Naomi once, then went back to pretending not to see her. Naomi leaned back, exhaled. Softly, she wasn't here to be liked. She wasn't here to prove anything. She was here for one reason, to observe. Because the empire she built didn't run on noise. It ran on knowledge, on knowing exactly how people treat you when they don't know who you are. Outside, the tarmac was beginning to blur under the weight of heat. The jet engines hummed. The cabin crew moved in final prep. But inside Naomi's mind, something else was humming. A quiet clarity. Not rage, not resentment, just recognition. Recognition of yet another space where judgment boarded before the passengers did. Lauren returned to the front, doing a final check. She looked Naomi's way again. That same glance. Not aggressive, but dismissive. Like Naomi was luggage that hadn't been stowed properly. Naomi looked out the window and said nothing, because in this cabin, silence would speak louder than power. Naomi hadn't said a word since boarding. She hadn't needed to. But now, silence was no longer enough. Lauren returned, this time with intent, her posture stiffer, her steps sharper, like she was approaching a problem rather than a passenger. She stopped right in front of Naomi's row, her expression unreadable but her tone soaked in polite threat. "Excuse me, ma'am," Lauren said, her voice tight and falsely courteous. "I believe you're in the wrong seat." Naomi looked up from her stillness, her gaze level. "No," she replied calmly. "This is my assigned seat." Lauren didn't blink. "This section is for our elite passengers," she said. "You must be mistaken." Across the aisle, the nosy socialite perked up, sunglasses now perched atop her head. Her interest was piqued, and she wasn't subtle about it. She leaned toward her neighbor with a smirk, whispering just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. She's probably trying to sneak a free upgrade. Others were starting to look now, some casually, others with the sharp edge of judgment, already forming behind narrowed eyes. Naomi didn't shift. "Perhaps you should check the passenger manifest," she suggested, her voice even, the words chosen with precision. "Before making assumptions." Lauren's nostrils flared. "That won't be necessary. I know this cabin, I know who belongs here." And just like that, the word was out in the open. Belongs. Naomi didn't argue. She didn't reach for her ticket. She didn't pull rank. She just sat there, fully composed, fully aware. The quiet was louder than ever now, drawing passengers into the scene like moths to flame. The businessman across the aisle lowered his tablet. His eyes scanned the interaction, jaw tightening slightly. He didn't speak, yet, but his attention was clearly on Naomi now, not as a spectacle, but as something that didn't sit right with him. Lauren crossed her arms, voice rising slightly. "If you don't move to the back, I'll have to call security." Naomi raised her eyebrows just a fraction. "Then call them." There was no edge in her voice, no fear, no anger, just truth. And that's what made it dangerous. Behind Lauren, Grace stood awkwardly near the galley wall. She'd been watching everything. Her hands were clasped in front of her, knuckles white. When Lauren barked, "Grace, escort this woman to the back," the young attendant flinched. Grace hesitated. It was barely a second. But Naomi noticed. Grace's eyes drifted toward the manifest clipped near the cockpit, then back to Naomi. Something about this felt wrong to her. She knew, yet she felt it. But Lauren's glare cut through her hesitation like a blade. "I said now, Grace." Grace swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am," she said softly, stepping forward with reluctant feet. Naomi's gaze moved to Grace, not in judgment, but in calm, understanding. She could see it, the war happening behind that soft, polite mask. Grace was scared, not of Naomi, but of losing her job. Lauren watched, arms folded, chest rising with self-assurance. That's when Naomi spoke again, quieter this time. Slower, but sharp as glass. "You might want to think very carefully about what you're doing." Lauren let out a short, humorless laugh. "I know exactly what I'm doing." Naomi didn't blink. "No," she said. "You don't." Something shifted in the cabin then. An invisible pressure, like a barometer dropping before a storm. The businessman leaned slightly closer. The socialite sat straighter, sensing that whatever this was, it wasn't just about a seat anymore. Lauren stepped forward, gesturing more dramatically now. "Ma'am, you are not supposed to be here. I'm not going to ask again." Naomi leaned back in her seat, crossed her legs slowly, and looked up at Lauren like a queen addressing a servant who'd just overstepped. "You shouldn't make assumptions about people," she said softly. Lauren scoffed. "And you shouldn't sit in seats you didn't pay for." That line hit harder than Lauren expected. It wasn't just a dig, it was a declaration, a verdict, and the entire cabin heard it. Naomi didn't answer right away. She reached slowly for her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and set it back down on the armrest. You could feel it, the tension folding in second by second like a string being pulled tight. "You're making a mistake," she said again. But this time the words didn't sound like a warning. They sounded like a verdict. Lauren didn't. First, she waved off the comment, turning to Grace again. "Escort her now." Grace took a small, shaky step forward, but the businessman spoke before she could move. "Is everything all right?" he asked Naomi, his tone calm, eyes concerned. Naomi nodded gently. "I'm fine, thank you." Lauren wheeled around. "Sir, I'd appreciate if you didn't insert yourself in this situation." He didn't blink. "From where I'm sitting," he said, You're the one causing the situation? That silenced Lauren for just a breath. But she couldn't let go. I've had enough of this, she snapped. Either you move, or I'll have you escorted off this flight. Naomi met her gaze with the kind of composure that made you question your entire reality. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't flinch, she simply said, "You can try," and with that, scene 2 ends. Not with shouting, not with chaos, but with a stillness that felt like a coming storm. A silence so charged it made people shift in their seats. Naomi didn't need to fight, because power, real power, doesn't flinch. Time passed. The plane cruised through altitude, but down in the cabin, the tension never left. It clung to the seats, drifted between passengers like secondhand smoke. Naomi remained still, composed, regal without effort. She hadn't been offered a drink, not a smile, not a word. Lauren had made her rounds, sparkling water for the Raymonds, champagne for the socialite, even casual small talk with the man who offered Naomi kindness. But Naomi? She didn't exist. At least, not to Lauren. It wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. Naomi waited, watched, observed how Lauren skipped her row again, how the tray of refreshments passed just inches away. Finally, when there was only one glass left on the tray, Naomi spoke. Her voice was gentle, warm even. "Excuse, may I have a glass of water, please?" Lauren didn't stop walking, she barely turned her head. "I'll get to you when I can," she said flatly, without even looking back. And then she was gone. Naomi blinked once, then settled back into her seat. It wasn't the water, it was the message. "You're not worth my time." Minutes passed. Naomi shifted slightly, trying to find comfort in her seat. She stretched one leg, just enough for her foot to settle gently into the edge of the aisle. Not obstructing, just present. Lauren returned. She saw the leg, and she made a choice. Instead of adjusting her path, she pivoted suddenly, sharply, her heel connecting directly with Naomi's shin. The tray in her hand jerked, the glasses tilted, and before Naomi could brace herself, cold water splashed across her lap. It was fast, intentional, and loud. Lauren gasped theatrically, her voice rising like a siren. "Watch where you're putting your legs. You've caused a mess." Gasps, whispers. Every head turned. Naomi, soaked from thigh to knee, looked up. Her hands, trembling only slightly, brushed the water from her slacks. But her expression, stillness. No anger, no embarrassment. Just truth. "You walked into my leg," she said calmly. "Deliberately," Lauren huffed. "This is exactly why we have rules. People like you." Naomi tilted her head. Her voice, now cold steel wrapped in velvet, cut through the air. "If respect is too much to ask for," she said, "then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." The cabin went silent. Even the air changed. Lauren took a step forward, her face flushed, her control slipping like sand through her fingers. "You think you can talk to me like that?" she hissed, and then she slapped her. The sound echoed like thunder inside the pressurized cabin. Passengers gasped, hands flying to mouths, glasses rattled. Even the engines seemed to hum louder. Grace froze. The businessman shot to his feet, eyes wide. The socialite dropped her phone. And Naomi? She didn't move, didn't touch her cheek, didn't raise her voice. She just sat there, her hand folded calmly in her lap, her face unshaken. She looked up at Lauren, meeting her eyes with a gaze that didn't scream or accuse, but promised. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," Naomi said quietly. Lauren took a half step back, something in Naomi's voice. It wasn't a threat, it was a prophecy. Naomi slowly straightened, adjusting her blazer with careful fingers. The wetness clung to her clothes, but her dignity stood dry and untouchable. Across the cabin, the businessman clenched his fists. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice protective. Naomi offered him a single nod. "I'm fine," she said softly. Lauren wasn't. Her breathing quickened. Her hands trembled. Her authority, once bulletproof, now cracked in front of everyone. "You've been disruptive since you boarded," she said, voice shaky. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't defend herself. She just straightened further. "You'll regret that," she said, her tone quiet, but it hit like a verdict. "Not because I'll fight back, but because people are watching now." Lauren looked around the cabin, at the businessman, at Grace, at every passenger now holding a phone or a breath or a silent judgment. And for the first time, she realized Naomi didn't need to yell to burn everything down. She only needed to exist, and now justice had altitude. The sound of the slap had long faded, but the silence it left behind was deafening. You could feel the atmosphere thicken, the kind of silence that made breathing feel like a statement. Naomi sat still in her seat, hands folded neatly, chin lifted. The red print across her cheek was undeniable, yet so was her calm. Her dignity didn't flinch, not even for a second. Across the aisle, the businessman remained half standing, face tight with disbelief. His jaw clenched, one hand gripping the back of the seat in front of him. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was bearing witness. Grace stood frozen near the galley, her eyes wide with horror, hand hovering over her mouth. Her training told her to stay calm, professional, but her conscience screamed otherwise. She'd seen the whole thing, everyone had, but no one had seen Naomi raise her voice, no one had seen her act out. All she had done was sit, and now she had been slapped for it. Lauren's face was flushed, breathing ragged. She didn't expect it to go this far. She hadn't thought about what would come after. Her hand was still trembling from the impact, her lips pressed into a tight line, desperate to preserve whatever authority she had left. "She provoked me," she said quickly, too loudly, as if saying it first would make it true. "You all saw how she was behaving. I was just trying to restore order." The businessman spoke then, voice low, clear, immovable. "You call that order?" Lauren turned sharply. "Excuse me?" "She never raised her voice," he said. "She never threatened anyone. She asked for respect. You denied her that. And now you've crossed the line." Others around the cabin murmured softly in agreement. A shift was happening, subtle but unmistakable. The socialite who had previously gawked now looked uncomfortable, adjusting her sunglasses to cover the awkwardness on her face. Naomi hadn't moved, but she didn't need to, because her silence had begun to unravel everything. Lauren's eyes darted around the cabin. "Phones down," she barked. "You're not authorized to record crew behavior." The businessman didn't move. "I'm not disrupting, just documenting the truth." Lauren opened her mouth to protest but caught herself. Her power, once absolute at 30,000 feet, now cracked under the weight of eyes. And judgment. Then Naomi moved. Calm. Measured. She reached for her phone, lifted it from the armrest, tapped a few times with the kind of deliberateness that made Lauren's pulse spike. She didn't call attention to it. She didn't announce anything, but every tap sounded louder than thunder. Lauren took a slow step forward. "What do you think you're doing?" Naomi didn't even look up. "Sending a message," she said quietly. Lauren swallowed. "To who?" Naomi locked eyes with her then, not with anger, but with something worse. "Certainty. You'll find out soon enough." She placed the phone gently back on the armrest and leaned into her seat, eyes forward. Lauren stood frozen. She didn't know who Naomi was. Not really. And, for the first time, that unknown, Naomi's silence, her confidence, her restraint, felt dangerous. Because Lauren had slapped a woman who hadn't disrespected her. She'd slapped a woman who never raised her voice. She'd slapped a woman who might not be the person she assumed. And the fear of not knowing was louder than anything Lauren had said all flight. Whispers replaced the hum of the engines. Soft at first, like a breeze weaving through tension. But then they grew. Hushed, voices leaking between seats, spreading sideways like fire under a locked door. She slapped her, in front of everyone? Did you see how calm that woman was? Something's not right. She didn't even flinch. The nosy socialite, who had been loud and curious earlier, now leaned in toward her seatmate. She whispered low, but her voice still carried. She has to be someone important. No one stays that calm unless they have power. Lauren heard it. She didn't acknowledge it, but she heard it. And for the first time since takeoff, she felt something slipping beneath her feet. Control, perception, authority, all unraveling, thread by thread. She straightened her uniform, adjusted her badge, re-gripped the tray as if her spine depended on it. Then she turned toward the cabin, voice pitched higher, eyes scanning the rows. "Let's not overreact," she said loudly, trying to reset the energy. "This was just a misunderstanding. Tensions were high and I acted to restore order. Please remain seated while I speak to the cockpit about the disturbance." But her voice lacked conviction now. It was the sound of someone trying to hold a note while drowning. The businessman didn't respond. He simply stared. The Raymonds remained silent, Mr. Raymond now folding his newspaper with slow precision, Mrs. Raymond knitting without looking up. And Naomi, still quiet, still calm, still terrifying. Lauren turned toward Grace, who had retreated to the galley but hadn't left the scene. Her eyes darted between the passengers and Lauren, unsure where to stand, literally and morally. Grace had seen too much. She had kept her mouth shut when it started. But now, her hands trembled. She reached into her uniform pocket, pulled out her phone behind the half wall of the galley and stepped back almost out of view. She moved fast, one glance to confirm she wasn't being watched, then a tap on the screen, a quiet ring. Then she whispered, "This is Grace. There's a situation on board. No, serious, I need to report it now." Her voice was steady but urgent, the kind of voice that didn't scream but would haunt you later in a report. She ended the call quickly, heart pounding. Then she slipped her phone back in her pocket and stepped out as if nothing had happened. But Lauren noticed. She didn't see the call, but she felt it. She watched Grace emerge with flushed cheeks, hands fidgeting. She knew that look, knew it from years of flying and managing junior crew, knew when someone's silence wasn't obedience. It was fear, or worse, rebellion. Lauren stepped closer. "Everything all right?" she asked, her tone sugar-laced but sharp underneath. Grace nodded too fast. "Yes, ma'am, all good." Lauren didn't believe her. She narrowed her eyes, then turned back toward Naomi, who remained planted in her seat, legs crossed, hands still folded in her lap, not a hair out of place, not a word spoken. But that was the problem. The silence. That damn silence. It wasn't passive. It was active, intentional. And now it was dangerous. Lauren's eyes scanned the cabin again. She saw it everywhere. The shift. Passengers who used to smile at her now looked away. Passengers who once trusted her now whispered behind napkins. And Naomi hadn't said a word in 15 minutes. Still, Lauren refused to break. She stepped into the aisle like it was a battlefield. Her smile strained but determined. "I'll be addressing the matter privately. For now, please enjoy the flight. Our crew will resume service shortly." No one clapped. No one nodded. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was judgmental. She turned and made her way down the aisle, past Naomi. For a second, she paused, stared at her, waited for Naomi to blink, to react, to flinch. But Naomi only tilted her head. Barely. Her gaze lifted. Not with malice. Not with gloating. Just presence. The kind that makes you question everything you thought you controlled. Lauren walked faster, and behind her, Naomi sat still, anchored in power that needed no announcement, because sometimes the most terrifying voice in the room is the one that doesn't speak at all. Footsteps sharp, purposeful, coming from the front of the plane. Every passenger turned, first out of curiosity, then instinct, because something was different about that walk, not the usual calm shuffle, of the flight crew. This was heavier, tighter. The cockpit door opened, and the pilot stepped out, his uniform immaculate, but his face pale, tense, like he'd just been handed something he wasn't prepared to carry. His eyes swept across the cabin, briefly scanning Rose before landing on Lauren. "Captain?" Lauren asked, forcing a tight smile. "Everything all right?" He didn't smile back. "I need to speak with you," he said. His voice was low, but firmly cutting through the murmurs like a scalpel. Every passenger heard him even if he wasn't speaking to them. Lauren blinked. "Now?" "Yes." "Step aside, please." She hesitated, glancing at the rows of passengers now fully tuned in, like they were watching courtroom drama unfold live at 30,000 feet. She crossed her arms, defensive. "I've got things under control." The pilot didn't flinch. "I just got off a call from corporate," he said. "There's something you need to know." A pause. Then it hit like a thunderclap. "The owner of this aircraft is Miss Naomi Williams." Gasps rippled through the cabin like a wave hitting glass. The nosy socialite clutched her pearls, literally. Her eyes widened, mouth open in stunned disbelief. "She owns the plane?" she whispered, almost choking on her own words. The businessman let out a quiet, knowing exhale. A small smirk crept across his face, not smug but satisfied. He'd suspected as much. Power, after all, has a scent, and Naomi had been wearing it all flight. Grace, standing near the galley, didn't move, but her shoulders dropped in relief. The weight she'd been carrying since Lauren first barked her name. It lifted. And Lauren? She froze. Her face drained of color, lips parting but no sound coming out. It was as if her body couldn't keep up with the truth now racing through. The cabin. The pilot looked from her to Naomi, then back again. "We will be making an unscheduled landing, for further review." And then the shift was complete, because Naomi stood. For the first time since the slap, her movements were graceful, deliberate. The room didn't get quieter because she stood. It got quieter because of what her presence meant now. No longer a silent stranger in a blazer. No longer a woman to be ignored. She was gravity now, and every person in the cabin orbited her. She adjusted her jacket, took a moment to smooth her cuffs, then looked directly at Lauren, who for once couldn't find a place to put her eyes. Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I'm not just a passenger," she said, each word clean, sharp, and final. "I'm the woman signing your paychecks." Lauren took a step back. Her body recoiled before her mind could stop it. Naomi turned to the passengers, not for applause, not for validation, but for clarity. "You all watched," she said. "You saw what happens when someone's judged not for their actions, but for the assumptions made about them. And no one could look away, because power doesn't raise its voice. It just stands up. And everything around it sits down. Silence has power, but sometimes truth demands a voice." Naomi stood still, framed by the cabin's dimmed lighting. The engines hummed, but all anyone could hear was her voice, clear, commanding, impossible to ignore. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. Her words struck deeper because of how quietly they landed. "Lauren," she said evenly, her eyes locked on the woman who'd spent the last hour treating her like a threat. "Your behavior today wasn't just unprofessional, it was disgraceful." Lauren looked like she'd swallowed glass. Her spine straightened automatically out of reflex, not pride. I didn't know who you were." Naomi's gaze didn't flinch. "Exactly." Then she paused, and when she spoke again, it was colder, sharper. "You didn't know, because you didn't care to find out." A beat passed. The words hit. Harder than the slap. They echoed, not just through Lauren, but through the passengers seated nearby. You could feel it shift again. The cabin had gone from rubbernecking curiosity to quiet judgment. And now? Now it was witness. People weren't just watching a spectacle anymore. They were watching a reckoning. Naomi stepped forward. You looked at me and decided I didn't belong here, she continued. Not because of my behavior, not because of any rule I broke, but because of how I look, how I carry myself. She didn't need to name it. Everyone in that cabin knew what she was talking about. Prejudice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles professionally while walking past. Your row without a word. Lauren tried to gather herself, lips trembling. I never meant... Naomi raised her hand. Not to strike, but to stop. You didn't mean to get caught, she said coldly. That's not the same as meaning no harm. Lauren's mouth opened, but no words came. The businessman leaned slightly forward, not out of drama, but solidarity. The socialite now looked down at her designer scarf as if it were a mirror. Mr. Raymond folded his hands. Mrs. Raymond paused her knitting. And Grace, quiet Grace, stood motionless near the galley, eyes full. Naomi turned slightly to address the cabin. Her voice didn't waver. There's a reason I didn't speak up sooner, she said. Because I wanted to see. I wanted to know. If the values printed in this airline's charter, equality, professionalism, respect, meant anything when no one was watching. She let the silence hang there. Let the passengers feel the weight of what she said. Lauren looked like she might break. Her hands clenched at her sides, her voice shaky. Please, Miss Williams, I didn't realize. That's the problem, Naomi said, gaze narrowing. You don't realize anything until it costs you something. Another beat. Then she stepped closer. Consider this your receipt. Lauren's face fell. No comeback, no spin. Her authority, once unquestionable, now looked like fabric unraveling in public. Naomi turned to the pilot, who stood nearby, jaw tight but respectful. This behavior, Naomi said, is unacceptable for anyone, anywhere, but especially on a flight that represents my name. The pilot nodded. Understood, Miss Williams. Lauren stepped back. Her feet barely moved, and everyone knew. This flight wouldn't end with an apology. It would end with consequences, because Naomi Williams didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. Naomi didn't pace. She didn't fume. She simply turned to the only other person on that plane whose authority had not yet crumbled, the pilot. He stood by the cockpit door, stiff with tension, but fully alert, waiting for her next move. Naomi met his eyes. Handle it, she said. 2 words. That was all. The pilot nodded. He didn't ask for clarification. He didn't need any. He tapped the comm on his collar and disappeared briefly through the cockpit door. Lauren stood frozen by the bulkhead, visibly shaking. She glanced around the cabin, searching for someone, anyone, to defend her. But the passengers had turned. Their faces weren't cruel, just final, even grace once her silent subordinate wouldn't meet her eyes. Seconds later, the pilot returned, with 2 uniformed officers in tow. The sight alone sent a ripple of energy down the aisle. Phones emerged, subtle at first, then bold. Some passengers gasped, some leaned in, others simply pressed record in silence. Lauren's eyes widened. Wait, this isn't necessary. This is a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to. You assaulted a passenger, the pilot said bluntly. On record. In front of witnesses. Lauren took a desperate step toward Naomi. Miss Williams, please. You know how stressful this job is. I wasn't thinking. Naomi's face didn't flinch. Her voice was still steady. That's exactly why you shouldn't be doing it. The first officer stepped forward. Miss Williams, would you like to press charges? The question didn't even hang in the air. Yes, Naomi replied immediately. I expect accountability. Lauren backed away instinctively. No, please, this will ruin me. You ruined yourself, Naomi said. I simply refuse to be silent about it. The officer pulled out cuffs. Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Lauren's knees buckled slightly as the cold metal clicked around her wrists. Her uniform, once a symbol of order and authority, was now a costume unraveling in real time. Her badge glinted one last time before it disappeared behind her back. Phones captured every angle, the sound of cuffs, the stunned expression, the walk of shame down the aisle. Passengers didn't cheer. They didn't boo. They just watched. Because justice doesn't always need applause. Sometimes it just needs to be seen. As the officers escorted Lauren off the plane, Naomi turned toward the rest of the cabin. The silence that followed wasn't tense this time. It was respectful. She smoothed the front of her blazer. "I want to apologize," she said, "to all of you, for what you had to witness. This is not the standard I expect on any aircraft, especially not one that bears my name." A few passengers nodded. Some murmured quietly. One even whispered, "Thank you." Naomi continued. "From this moment forward, I'll be reviewing our entire crew training program. Because no passenger, no human being, deserves to be treated like that." Her voice was calm but powerful. Because she wasn't just restoring order, she was restoring dignity. And this time, everyone listened. As the cabin slowly exhaled, tension melting into something warmer, Naomi turned, not to the passengers, not to the pilot, but to Grace. The young attendant stood by the galley, hands still trembling, but not from fear anymore. From adrenaline. From the weight of witnessing something bigger than herself unfold. And for once, she was on the right side of it. Naomi approached her slowly, deliberately, her heels soft against the carpet. "You did the right thing," Naomi said, her voice low but carrying. Grace blinked, eyes wet. I should have said something sooner." Naomi shook her head. "You spoke when it mattered." A pause. Then Naomi added, with that same measured grace that had silenced the cabin only moments earlier. "And people who speak up when it matters, they're the ones I want leading." Grace's lips parted in surprise. "Ma'am?" Naomi smiled, just slightly, but it was real. "You'll be hearing from my office about a promotion." The businessman clapped once, then twice. The sound caught. Other passengers joined in. It wasn't theatrical. It was earned. The socialite, still stunned from the earlier reveal, now leaned forward and applauded with genuine admiration. "You're amazing," she said, her voice half whisper, half confession. "You didn't just sit in first class, you redefined it." Naomi nodded toward her. "Thank you. And remember, respect isn't a luxury. It's a requirement." The cabin filled with light applause, a soft swell of vindication and shared understanding. No one on that plane would forget what they had just witnessed. No one would forget the woman who said almost nothing. Until it was time to say everything. Naomi stepped toward the exit, the pilot holding the door, head respectfully bowed. Outside, the plane had already landed quietly on a private runway. Awaiting her at the base of the steps, a sleek black SUV, engine running, doors already open. Two assistants stood beside it, briefcases in hand, phones in motion. Naomi descended, with the kind of calm reserved for royalty and CEOs who knew the weight of silence. She didn't rush. She didn't wave. But cameras clicked anyway. Her image, her stance, told 1,000 stories without her needing to tell any of them again. She paused briefly before stepping into the SUV, her assistant whispering a briefing in her ear. As the door shut gently behind her, the engine purred forward. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Because when you carry yourself like the future, the past stops trying to chase you. And today, Naomi Williams didn't just own the plane. She owned the moment. The video went viral in under 24 hours. First it was a Twitter thread, then a TikTok remix, then breaking news. A black woman, poised, silent, dignified, had been publicly disrespected on her own private aircraft, and responded not with outrage, but with consequence. Clips of Naomi's calm face after the slap were everywhere. Her line, "You didn't mean to get caught," turned into a rallying cry. And in a now iconic interview just days after the incident, Naomi sat beneath studio lights in a deep navy suit, the same color she wore that day, and looked directly into the camera. Her voice was clear, her eyes unwavering. Respect is a right, she said, not a luxury, not a reward for looking a certain way, not a favor handed down. Everyone deserves it, and we need to stop waiting for someone to be powerful or famous before we treat them like they matter. The host leaned forward, clearly moved. You didn't shout, you didn't demand attention, and yet, the world listened. Naomi's expression softened just slightly, because silence, when rooted in truth, echoes louder than a scream. In the weeks that followed, Naomi announced sweeping changes to her airline: mandatory bias, training for all staff, anonymous passenger reporting systems, real accountability for customer service, and a new mission statement printed on every boarding pass. Every passenger, every seat, equal dignity, no exceptions. Airlines across the industry were forced to respond. Competitors issued their own statements. CEOs scrambled. But Naomi wasn't reacting. She was leading. A few weeks later, she boarded another flight. This time she wore the same blazer, no assistants, no fanfare, just Naomi Williams quietly walking up the steps of her aircraft. The crew greeted her at the door, not with overcompensation, but with authenticity. Welcome aboard, Miss Williams, the new flight attendant said, smiling warmly. It's an honor to have you with us. Naomi smiled back, accepted the offer of water without a second thought, and took her seat by the window. The engines hummed to life. The wheels began to roll. As the plane climbed through the clouds, she leaned, her head gently against the glass, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to exhale. The sky outside stretched wide and infinite, a canvas of soft blue and endless white. Up here, there was no noise, no judgment, no rank, just air, just peace. Her reflection in the window looked back at her, not as a CEO, not as a headline, but as a woman who had refused to shrink in the face of injustice and change something because of it. Voiceover. Justice isn't just punishment, it's the echo of dignity, restored. She closed her eyes. But what Naomi didn't know was that this flight wouldn't be the last test of her leadership. Something darker was coming, and this time, it wouldn't just be words.